Hi everyone, welcome to Rachel's Studio, and in today's tutorial, we are going to learn how to paint this little guy. So today's version will be an abridged, sped up version of the 2-hour-long, in-depth, highly edited tutorial that I did for my Patreon students and my other online students. So I hope you get a lot out of it. I'm going to pack a lot of information in, so be sure to watch to the end because those last details are just as important, if not more important, than the first one. So let's go ahead and get started. I started this painting on Arches cold press 140 pound. Some of the art supplies I used include a white gel pen. And by the way, I will put links to all my favorite supplies down below. They are affiliate links, so thank you for using those. And I also will use a misting spray bottle. Here you see me putting on my Holbein soft tape on my Arches cold press 140 pound onto a backing board used by framers. I painted this in an 8x10 format. I painted this another time as a commission in an 11x14 format so that I could get more dramatic details in the eyes. So the bigger you paint this, the more details you'll be able to get. The smaller you paint it, the more manageable it will be, and it will take a little bit less time probably. The brushes that I use are mostly silver black velvet. I use a size 8 round, a 3/4 oval, a size 4 long Princeton Aqua Elite for super little details. And I also must use a size 2 stiff scrubber to get my techniques and my softness that I use in this painting. And that's why you need to use really good quality Arches cold press watercolor paper or some other really high-end good quality paper, because those papers will take scrubbing while most other paintings will not. I painted this with a fairly limited palette, and I used Winsor & Newton, Winsor Violet, Daniel Smith, Lamp Black, Winsor & Newton Burnt Sienna, Winsor & Newton Cobalt, and Winsor & Newton French Ultramarine. And the first thing I'm going to do is put a very watery tea consistency glaze of water over this whole thing. I added a little blue just so that you could see where I'm putting my water, and I basically put it everywhere but the eyes. And I do not allow any puddles, but it is quite glistening. And then I float in thicker and thicker paint. And you see me putting in some ultramarine blue, some Winsor violet, and then as the painting progresses, I put in thicker and thicker paint in the areas where I want darker. Here I'm putting in pretty much pure burnt sienna, maybe with a little bit of ultramarine mixed in. When you're painting Siamese cats, you really don't need any other colors other than ultramarine blue. I recommend Winsor & Newton French Ultramarine, Winsor & Newton Burnt Sienna, and maybe a lamp black. I used a lot of lamp black in this picture just because I've been using it a lot and it's in my habit, but a lot of times I will mix a black using burnt sienna and French ultramarine, and it makes for a beautiful, beautiful painting. It makes for beautiful effects. They really granulate out a lot and cause a lot of interesting textures. So here is the painting dry after that first session. So I'm about 20 minutes into the painting session now, and I've got my first layer on, and I always paint as much as I can in that first session because it stays fresher. But next I'll start mapping in some details. And what I like to do is put in some of the darkest darks. You might hear a lot in watercolor. In general, you need to paint from light to dark. And in general, that's true, but you can also put in the most darkest areas like the mouth here and the nose holes, and it almost acts like a map for later layers of paint application so that you don't get lost in the painting, especially for more complex subjects like flowers with a lot of petals or things like that. But you can do that with facial details on the cat too, and if you let it dry, it's like letting the paint set. And then you can paint subsequent layers on top of that without that thick paint moving. You just have to let it completely dry. And then what I do is I just paint in glazes. And glazes are just successive layers of fairly tea consistency paint. You let them dry and then you paint another layer on top of that. So what you see me doing here on this cheek is putting in the blue, and then putting in a few of the black details, and then I'll let that completely dry. And then later, after it's bone dry, I'll go in with a very small brush and paint in little fur details on top of that.
and it creates a great effect of realism. So I highly recommend painting that way. That is a wet and dry technique that's more amenable to beginners. And then if you are more experienced, you might paint a lot more of that wet in wet. And I demonstrate that in the other tutorial that I did of this same cat that I did as the actual commission, but it's more complicated process, but it results in softer textures, more dreamy effects, but it's harder to do. So again, that's why I'm painting mostly wet on dry in this tutorial that I made for my Patreon students who are more beginners. So anyway, I'll let all that other part dry. Here I got that ear wet. I do that so when I charge in paint, it spreads out softly, almost painting itself. Next, I'll put in some red purple mix, milk consistency, and then I float it in cream consistency, lamp black. And then you see me using one of my favorite techniques, which is painting cream consistency onto fairly damp paper, because you see how the marks hold their shape, but they also spread out a little tiny bit softly, and it provides such a pretty soft fur effect. Here you may notice those rough, scrumbly, almost bumpy marks, and that is from me painting with a dry on dry technique wherein I hit a dry spot in the paper, and because my brush has less water in it and more paint in it, I got that texture. Use the side of your brush in fast strokes to replicate this dry on dry look. And here you see me doing those finer detailed fur textures. I'm putting a glaze of fur texture over that dried area. It's now dry and I can paint layers of fur texture on top of that. So that's a common way to build up fur texture in watercolor. You do a layer of fur texture like this, let it dry. Do another layer like you see me putting that darker fur texture on over that dry layer, and you just build up layers and layers of fur texture on top of dried layers of fur texture, and it really can make some nice, realistic, very furry effects. So I'm going to continue on my merry little way. I splay the bristles of my brush there to create more fur texture, and I continue to build up the fur textures and the values. And just remember, when you're painting these fur textures and getting the fur the right value, meaning light or dark, you really need to be looking a lot at your reference and making sure you're getting things dark or light enough, and also look at your reference a lot to make sure that you are painting in the right direction, because the fur changes its direction often. You really need to look at your reference photo frequently. And here we are doing the eyes, and I start with some French ultramarine. No, I start with some cobalt blue as an underlayer, tea consistency, and while that's moist, I float in some milk to cream consistency, French ultramarine on top of that to add a little bit of dimension. And then I finish by putting in the darkest darks. And then I need to let that dry and set, and then I can go in and put more layers over that, like the pupils. So if you want to watch a more detailed video about painting cat's eyes, I have a whole video on painting cat's eyes, so be sure to check that out. And now you just see me continuing to build the layers on top of dried layers of fur texture. And sometimes I use something called a dry brush technique, where I use the side of my brush with a lot of paint in it and just a little water, and I use quick sweeping motions to give this texture that you see. It's not a soft texture, it's kind of a harder texture, but it's a nice fur texture. So you can also use dry on dry techniques to get these fur textures. Then I put in my pupils with lamp black cream consistency on dry paper. Make sure that paper is dry for this, using my Princeton Aqualite 4 Long that's so good at these little details, and continuing to build up the layers again with that lamp black. All right, now we are at the next day. Everything's perfectly dry, and I need to address this bottom right quadrant, and I just wet the whole area, the bottom right quadrant, with clean water, and then I'm just floating in more details with my size 8 round silver black velvet brush. Now I've got my Aqualite brush for more little details, so you can do as many layers as you want. If you're using this Arches cold press paper, it's really tough. It takes a lot of layers, so you see I'm letting my layers dry and putting more successive layers on top of those to continue to build up those fur textures. And now I'm showing you my size 2 stiff scrubber, which I use a ton, which I call my dreamifier. I am dreamifying this painting, including what you just saw me do is scrub parts of that ear so it doesn't look so stiff. And I also scrub in areas that have gotten a little too stiff or hard edged, and it just really softens a lot of the details. And I use my scrubber a ton in this stage of the painting, especially when I've got it, I'd say 3/4 to 90% done. I'm scrubbing that eye to attach it into the cat. I talk a lot about that in the actual tutorial about the Rembrandt effect and how it's important to attach things like the eyes into the painting and also the cat into the painting by using the Rembrandt effect and also using a scrubber. And now I'm in the stage which I call putting on the jewelry, where you put on those fine little tiny details like the little eyeliner marks and the harder edges. Whatever final details you need, I dot on nose texture. You might have seen me do that. I'm sorry this is going so fast, but anyway, I'm putting more milk consistency lamp black in the darkest area of the cat there. Okay, we are entering the final stages of the painting process, and this is the time that I like to look at my painting with a critical eye and say, what else does it need? What else can I do to make this painting look special? And one of the principles I turn to is James Gurney's windmill principle that I talked about in last week's video about making sure you have all the pairings of light on light, dark on light, light on dark, light on light around your main subject to make sure that it looks like it's part of the painting. And I noticed that I don't have any light cat on dark background. So I decided to add some darker background in the lower right quadrant. So that's what you see me doing here. I get it wet first, and then I charge in a little bit of Winsor Violet and also French Ultramarine cream consistency. And then I kind of pull it up with a damp, clean brush up into the rest of the background to kind of blend it in. Where I'm going to do my whiskers, I'm going to use my white gel pen, and I'm also going to use these new Micron archival pens for the black whiskers, and I'm painting them in clumps of 3 because that's how whiskers grow. And then I'm using the white gel pen for the dark side of the cat, putting those in, and also some eye glints. And then I'm going to sign with my Micron archival pen. I usually use my Tombow Fudenosuke pen for that, but I just got these new Micron pens. I was trying them out and I really liked using them to sign, and I really liked using them for the dark whiskers. So that was great. And so here is the final painting. And also just to compare the two paintings, this is the 11 by 14, and the reason why the eyes are a little bit brighter looking is I painted them with the base of cerulean blue. So cerulean blue was really pretty. I liked what it added to the painting. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you would like to watch this more in depth and get access to a lot of other ad-free tutorials with line drawings and reference photos and a lot of other goodies, too many to describe here, go check out my Patreon.
Please come join my Facebook group that is free. You can post your work, and it's a very supportive community, and we can give you tips or just say good job. And you can do the same for other blossoming artists. So I'd love to see you there. Now go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.